Hey everybody, Will Martin here. So in this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 ways that we can fix the nursing shortage. Hey everybody, Will Martin here. Welcome to the Nurse Scientist channel. If you get a chance, please subscribe to the channel. Please leave some comments because I like the interaction between you and I. It's really interesting to me, and I think it helps everybody when we can read what's on everyone else's mind. So we're going to talk about 5 ways that we can fix the nursing shortage. Now, I can probably think of more than 5, but I'm going to give you the top 5 ways that I think we can fix the nursing shortage. I want to hear what you think and what your ideas might be. So reason number 1, and probably the most important, is pay nurses what they're worth. Now, let's go back in time. When I became an RN in 1990, my salary when I started was $23,000 and some change. And of course, that was a step up from what I was working as a paramedic, where I think I topped out around $17,000 a year, believe it or not, back then. And I thought that was big money. I mean, I was rolling in the dough. So when I became an RN and was making $23,000 a year with good benefits, I thought things were great. And after 1 year, I went up a grade to, I think it was about $30,000 a year. Now, after that, things kind of slowed down a little bit. That first year gave you a pretty good jump. But what really shocks me is that nurses today, nurses that I'm working with, aren't making significantly more than that. Yes, they're making more, but they're not making a ton more than that, even though that was years and years ago that I was making 30. I think when I left in 1996, when I left the ICU, I was making, I'm going to say probably close to $40,000 a year. And I think that most of the nurses that I'm working with in the emergency department, I'm going to guess, but I think they're probably making around $60,000 or $70,000 a year base, and that's also maybe with a little bit of overtime. It's obvious that the market works 2 ways. I mean, you can argue that nurses have to kind of suck it up, and this is what the market pays, and this is what you're going to have to deal with. But I think, especially over the past 2 years of the pandemic, the market has also shown that nurses are willing to walk away from the bedside. They're willing to do other things, particularly outside of the hospital. And as a result, the hospital has lost bed capacity. Wait times in the emergency department are just out of this world, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But it shows that the market has now lost pace with what nurses are worth, and there has to be an increase in compensation to nurses to get them to come back to the bedside and work. It's as simple as that. It's market driven. And it's not just nursing salaries too. It's across the board. It's everyone in healthcare. I mean, when I became an NP, my salary, and this is working in the ICU, essentially there for 24 hours, 3 days a week, my salary was a lateral move from my RN pay. I mean, I did it because I wanted to work as a nurse practitioner, and working in the ICU was just comfortable for me since I had over 6 years of ICU experience in cardiopulmonary ICU. So it made sense to me, and it wasn't a huge transition, but it also wasn't a huge pay bump. And it wasn't until several years later that I gained a little experience, got to know a few people, and quite frankly, I was there at the right time and was able to get a good salary bump and go work in emergency medicine. And I've been very fortunate since then. But my PA colleagues, my other NP colleagues, are extremely underpaid as well. And they're working way more hours than our physician colleagues are. And again, I don't want to get into, PAs, NPs, and physicians. Let's face it, there's a huge difference in training. There's a huge difference in overall education. PAs and NPs shouldn't expect to get the same benefits or the same pay as physicians. However, as an example, our PAs and our nurse practitioners that work, unfortunately not for our group, but they work for an outside company that we employ, they're working 1,832 hours a year. Now, if you consider 2,080 hours a year to be a full-time job, okay, they're getting about 6 weeks of time off, but working 1,800 hours a year in the emergency department is taxing, particularly when you consider that our physicians to be considered full-time is 1,400 hours a year. So again, I don't want to get too off on a tangent because we're talking about nursing, but I also want to throw that out there. So the second thing that I want to bring up, and this may not be popular amongst our purist nurses who are really into designations and certifications, but this magnet status, this ANCC magnet thing, This is coming from somebody who's been a nurse for a long, long time. I've never understood it. There are hospitals that are spending millions of dollars to become magnet designated, and they truly think that this magnet designation is going to attract nurses, that nurses are going to flock to that hospital because, oh, wow, I'm working for a magnet hospital. There's probably 2 or 3 out of 100 that care about that. The rest simply want to have good pay and good benefits and a flexible schedule and not be understaffed, and also to be respected for what they do every day. They don't care about this whole magnet thing. Magnet, all it does is it creates more jobs within the hierarchy, more white-coated nurses walking around. You're not really sure what they do, but they all have titles. And I can tell you, as an example, is that I was curious about a position that showed up at my hospital for nurse scientist. And I thought, well, hey, you know what? I have a DNP, I have a PhD. I might be interested in doing that job. So anyway, I sat down informally with somebody to talk about this nurse scientist job. Here's how it came down. Was, well, we're looking for someone to do, nursing research. Okay, all right, that's fine. But, we don't really know for sure just how we want this to play out. So it was very nebulous. It wasn't clear at all to me. And then what really bothered me is I said, listen, I have a clinical practice in the emergency department. I also have a clinical practice in the wound center. I'm preparing to go into hyperbaric medicine also. I don't want to lose that. But I'd be happy to do some research. And let's face it, there's not a lot of DNP, PhDs running around for you to recruit from. And this newly minted DNP, who's a administrator at the hospital, she said, well, we would like to have a PhD. It would be great, but we'll take a DNP, and maybe we'll even take a master's prepared nurse, with the right background. So I said, well, then you're really not interested in research. So what it told me was that this magnet program in my hospital simply wanted to have a nurse scientist to walk around with a white coat on and be up on the nursing units and be a presence and just sort of look important and serve a role that magnet probably required. I'm guessing, because otherwise, what would be the purpose of this? I mean, I'm all for nursing research. We should be doing more of it, and we should be doing hardcore nursing research, not just descriptive blah, which means nothing, but I mean some real randomized controlled trials in conjunction with other faculty in the hospital, with physicians, with pharmacists. I mean, we could be doing real research, but we're not. We're busy doing descriptive studies on hand washing and descriptive studies on how often we turn and position people. And this kind of stuff drives me nuts, as you can probably tell. Anyway, and back to my point, is that the hospital spends God knows how many hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to attain magnet recognition. I know that it took us, I don't even know, 2 or 3 years, I think, to gain magnet recognition at my hospital. So now you're magnet recognized. So what? We've lost nurses as a result. We're in desperate need of nurses because we've closed so many beds. Our emergency department has wait times that are just unconscionable. And that's what magnet status has done. Now, you can blame the pandemic for it. Come on. There's more to it than just the pandemic. The magnet status didn't retain people like they advertise it would. So let's just call it what it is. So you're spending all of this money. You could be putting that money into bonuses and recruitment and retention activities for current nurses, graduating nurses, and trying to get nurses back to the bedside. Okay, and here's the other thing now. Another point is hire back the nurses that you fired due to vaccine mandates. We fired, I'm not even sure because they won't disclose the number, but personally I know of several in the emergency department and also in the wound center and the hyperbaric center that were fired because, in my mind, they had valid reasons not to get the vaccine. One was immunocompromised. Another one did have a religious exemption that sounded valid. Another one was actively trying to get pregnant. But in any case, they left. They got fired rather than take the vaccine. You can say that that's right or wrong, but I think time has shown us that we have to keep up with the times. That the vaccine was probably extremely helpful in that early phase of COVID, and then it became less and less of an advantage. And now, we can argue, and we should talk more about this. is the vaccine in its current form still an advantage? In any case, we lost a lot of nurses. Those nurses are trained. In the case of the wound care nurse that I'm talking about, she was trained in hyperbarics and wound care. It takes a minimum of a year to get a nurse trained in hyperbaric medicine. And you just don't find those nurses that want to do that kind of work because it's on call. Our hyperbaric center is a 24-hour on-call emergency hyperbaric center. So we're there for, the carbon monoxide poisonings and all the other things that come in middle of the night. And these nurses oftentimes get called in at night to dive a patient. So when you lose someone to something like a vaccine mandate, and now that we're past the vaccine and we have Omicron BA2 and there's another variant in the UK ready to come over that probably is going to be mild, we can see that the vaccine isn't as critical at this point. So hire these nurses back and hire them back with an apology. Adequate staffing. Adequate staffing has always been an extremely important thing. There's nothing more demoralizing than to come into work and know that you're going to be short-staffed. I don't care if you're a nurse practitioner working with one less provider. You know that you're going to be seeing more patients. You know you're going to be working harder. You know that you're going to be spinning more plates in the air at any given time because you have one less body seeing patients. It's the same thing for nurses because, we limit the number of beds that we open in the emergency department based upon the number of nurses that we have. And so we may have 35 or 40 beds in an emergency department, but we might only be able to open maybe 15 or 20 or 25 of them early in the day because we don't have enough nurses to staff those beds. So then the waiting room just piles up and piles up and piles up. And, that is one way to maintain adequate staffing, but we're not doing any favors to the patients that are coming in, usually on the advice of their doctor, to come into the emergency department. And oftentimes they're not there for something mild. They're there for legitimate reasons, and they are waiting in the waiting room forever. And this is just inexcusable. And it's known to everyone. It's known to hospital administration across the country, and yet it's happening. And it's becoming the new normal. It's like we're becoming okay with the new normal. So the final thing I want to talk about is a compilation of ideas. Okay, and the first idea is, first of all, let's regain that lost bed capacity. I know that hospitals across the country have more beds than we're currently utilizing because they don't have enough nurses. If you pay nurses competitively and you get them to come back to the bedside, you open up more beds. If you open up more beds, you reduce ED boarders. If you reduce ED boarders, you reduce the emergency department waiting room time, and everything starts to flow a little bit better. I mean, this is really where it all lies, is you need to get nurses back to the bedside. Is there a nursing shortage? Listen, they've been saying there was a nursing shortage since 1987 when I first went to school to get my RN. And that's why I went to school. I went for free. It didn't cost me anything because there was such a nursing shortage. So, hey, I took advantage of that. But there's still a nursing shortage now, from what they say. But I think there's an adequate number of nurses. There's just more opportunities for nurses to work outside the hospital. I don't blame them. I mean, if you can go work in a diagnostic center and work Monday through Friday from 8 to 4, and at 4 o'clock, everybody's done. You want to get out of there. There's no call. There's no emergency time. You don't see anybody die or, let's face it. When you can go work in an aesthetic center or something like that and you never see anybody die, that's a plus. That's a plus. And so, as I said, this directly would affect emergency department wait times. Now, I can tell you 1,000 stories, but I'll tell you one story from just this past Friday, just couple of days ago. I had a patient coming in, new patient consult in the wound center. This is a fellow that I saw 4 years ago, and I did a new patient consult on him then. He's a diabetic. He's also a renal transplant, pancreas transplant. So he's immunosuppressed. He had stepped on a nail about a month ago. He had gotten a small wound on the bottom of a toe. He was seen in the emergency department. There were pictures taken. I looked at the pictures. It didn't look too bad. They put him on antibiotics. They discharged him home. He came back to the emergency department a few days later because he was running a fever. The toe looked a little bit worse. They admitted him to the hospital. They kept him for 3 days. They put him on IV antibiotics. They did an MRI. There was no osteomyelitis. They decided that he could go home with oral antibiotics, and so they sent him home, and they set him up for a referral to the wound clinic. So I saw him a couple of days ago. Unfortunately, when I saw him, His toe was completely necrotic. He had necrosis pretty much circumferential around the base of the toe, and the tip of the toe was cyanotic blue. I mean, he was going to lose the toe. There's no doubt about it. He needed an emergent vascular consult right then and there. I couldn't send him home. There was no sense in putting him on antibiotics. I mean, he had a malodorous foot. He's diabetic, as I've probably said. So anyway, and because he's a renal transplant guy and he's immunosuppressed, he needs to probably be admitted to the hospital. So I sent him up to the emergency department. This was at 8:30 in the morning. When I left at 4:30 in the afternoon, he was still in the waiting room. Now, I had called the emergency department. As you know, I work up there. I called my colleagues. I said, I'm sending this guy up from the wound clinic, which is one floor below the ER. But there's nothing that they could do. There's just no physical place to put him to be able to evaluate him and begin treatment. So that poor guy was sitting in a waiting room filled with 50 other people. He's immunosuppressed, and he is waiting hours. And to be honest, I don't even know what time he finally did get seen. But it's inexcusable. There's no reason for it. It's never happened in all of these years. Yes, we've had days where you've had to wait in the waiting room for a few hours. Absolutely. You know, those summer days when everybody's coming in with, you know, summertime injuries, or on those snowy days when everybody slips and falls and breaks a bone. Yes, the waiting room can kind of pile up on those few days, but that's few and far between. But it has never been like this, where every single day, day in and day out, there are boarders in the emergency department because we don't have beds upstairs. Why don't we have beds upstairs? Because we don't have nurses. Why don't we have nurses? Because we're not recruiting them in such a way that makes them want to come and work there. How do you recruit them? You have to pay them adequately. You have to give them flexible scheduling. You have to give them adequate benefits. You have to be competitive with your other hospitals. And you have to maintain those adequate staffing levels that maintain a degree of safety. So let's get these nurses back. Let's recruit them back. Let's pay them more. Let's regain some of these nurses that we've lost through vaccine mandates. Let's get them back. Let's get our bed capacity back where it's supposed to be. And the final thing that I think no one is really realizing is there's going to be another pandemic. Whether we believe in this or not, whether we think that pandemics are, you know, worthy of what we've done for the past 2 years or not, that's a story for another day. But the fact is, someone somehow is going to spring another pandemic on us, you know, whether it's legit or otherwise. And we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready with staffing. We have to be ready with adequate supplies. And we have to have a better plan. And there has to be some studies that show us that what we're doing is what really helps, not anecdotal stuff. I'm done, and I'll tell you again, please, if you can subscribe to the channel, I appreciate it. I've been working for the last 10 days pretty much straight because a lot of my colleagues have gotten COVID. They're fine, they're mild symptoms, but they still have to follow the protocol, and they're out for 5 days until they're asymptomatic. So as a result, there's me to cover. And for whatever reason, I have never tested positive for COVID. I've certainly gotten tested several times. I've not gotten it, knock on wood. Anyway, I'm the guy to go in and cover for everybody. So now that I've said it, I'm probably jinxed myself. I'll probably get COVID tomorrow, but hey, what are you going to do? Listen, everyone, thanks for following my channel. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to make videos more regularly, especially if they give me some days off, and then I can get some things done. So until next time, I'll talk to you again soon. I'm Will Martin. Thanks.